Soumya Sengupta. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Matteo.
Soumya, we're going to talk today about scaling software development teams, what it takes, some challenges that come with it, some risks to avoid, some best practices. And we're going to do that by talking about your story and everything you lived during the last years, right? So
Yep.
I want to get started with the basics and the picture of what you're doing today. What do you do today for a living, Soumya?
Yeah, so I grow teams. I basically guide engineering teams to build great products. And I also help individuals and teams kind of achieve their biggest potentials as they can. So typically, that's my day-to-day job. That involves a variety of things over people management, technical management, and process management.
Very nice. And when did you actually get into technology? Did you always know that you wanted to be an engineer?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about about that a few days ago, with something unrelated. And yeah, I mean, I think that I always wanted to be an engineer because when I look back, even in high school, that's when I first got introduced to computers and computer programming. And this was back in India, so totally different time, totally different space, but still I was very fascinated with that entire concept. Most likely everyone who is in this field was kind of caught that bug when they first started. You write a few things and suddenly a computer does something that is awesome, right? So that was always very fascinating to me, and I knew right then that this is the field I'm going to be in. So I did during my college years, I was into physics also. So at a point, I was very much interested in doing scientific computations in physics. But then at one point, I actually worked in a lab, and I was fascinated with the distributed computing setup that they had, right? I mean, there are different labs at different computers, and they're all connecting and talking to each other. And then I got interested in distributed computing. And then, over the years, most likely, most other people in distributed computing found their way into web application development and so on and so forth. So I kind of followed that same trajectory. But at heart, I'm probably still an engineer. I still love building things. I still like making them efficient. Yeah, so I would probably say that yeah, I always wanted to be an engineer.
Nice. Two questions that I always like to ask engineers. Many of them, from an early age, they liked putting things apart and then putting them together again. Did you have that
Mhm.
trait as well?
Yes, yeah. I remember back in the day, I was, I guess, what, like 11 or 12 maybe, and my dad got this. I don't even, I'm really dating myself here, but like this VCRs, right? Like video cassette recorders, and it was not working for some reason. No background in electronics, no background in anything. But I said, let me just open it up and let's see what happens. Well, fortunately, I was able to put it back together, but that taught me a little bit of a lesson that, hey, if you are opening things up and taking them apart, make sure that you know how to put them back together again. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. Even today, I think I have. Obviously, I don't open up anything and everything as much as I can. But I do have that curiosity of, hey, how is this working? How is that working? And try to kind of follow that as much as possible. So.
And the second question I have is many of the engineers I know were also super big into computer games and gaming, right? Is that something that happened with you? And if so, what was one of the first games that you remember playing in a computer?
Well, okay, so this one will probably I'll probably out myself here. I'm not a big gaming enthusiast at this point. I am like, it kind of comes and goes. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. I do like the type of games that are more cerebral in nature rather than those first-person shooters and that type of stuff. But yeah, so I did used to play a long, long, long time back, of Persia. That was one of the first games I remember.
I
So
love that one. I love that one. And I was watching the other day how they made all the movements of the guy running and
yeah,
jumping, and they used like a real character, right? And they were
yeah,
looking at how the character used to jump, the movement of the legs when you jumped, and like you were growing, catching like the wall, right? And then trying
correct.
to
Yeah,
stand up, and then the whole sword fighting, and then that was a beautiful game. You just
I,
brought me so many good memories there.
absolutely. And to imagine that, like, those being done without, like, with very rudimentary technologies of the day, it's really, like, eye opening. But yeah, eventually I kind of got into Quake, Doom for a bit, and then, but again, like, I'm probably not one of those guys who's going to be like has a favorite right now. So
A question: did you ever play Monkey Island?
I may have played it. It sounds familiar. Probably I did. I'm not entirely sure though.
The one about
I
the
love
pirates. You early. It was very cerebral. You had to put things together, clues, etc., etc. And it was about a pirate. Um, Never mind. Same,
probably not. Then
same timing as Prince of Persia. That's what I'm asking. We are both dating ourselves here, but it doesn't matter. It's all good. Um, Now let's go back to your experience as a leader, right? How
sure.
did the first opportunity of leading a team came about? What do you remember of that time, and how was that experience?
Yeah. So it was kind of somewhat of an accident, I would say. So I was working for a company, and I was in a team of about like 4 or 5 developers, and there was suddenly a big upheaval in the team. The team lead left, one of the senior developers left. I was somewhere in the mid level in my career at that time. So and you kind of think like, hey, all these people leaving, obviously that's not good, but then again there's an opportunity. But then if suddenly most of your team members leave, then that's not also a good thing. And I was, if I remember correctly, I was fairly new in the job also. So, but hey, the show must go on, right? Like, I mean, nothing stops because people are leaving. Obviously, the team was trying to fill those positions, but that's going to take time. So that's when I kind of started putting together a bunch of different. I took a lot of responsibilities at the time. Like, for example, like I learned how to do continuous integration. That was a big thing just coming up at the time. So I kind of learned like, hey, this might be useful for me because I don't want to do everything by hand. And then, lots of design patterns and a lot of different things, making technical decisions, talking to different stakeholders, because there was really no one else who could do that at that point. So I did that for a few months, and then as the team started growing, um, I believe my bosses at the time decided that, hey, you're doing pretty good at this. Like, why don't you continue? So that was, I guess, like an inroad into leadership in some ways. And then as I got my team back, obviously at that time they started hiring more junior developers, and I that's when I kind of started realizing that wait, leadership is not just being technically decent, right? You got to lead your team in various other things. People would come and say, hey, I don't know what to do here. What am I doing? How to. So it's nothing to do with technology. It was kind of mentoring them, guiding them. So that I think that particular experience was great. It was kind of in a rushed way. I was really not prepared for it. I was not looking for it, but it happened. But I think that was a good thing because then eventually I saw that not only do I like to build things, but I think it's, again, as I said, like, I mean, it's not just about the technology. It's a lot of people, processes, technology. That's what I kind of always lean back on. And so I decided that I'll stay in that on that track. So, and that's it. That's how I got started with my leadership.
It's very nice because maybe it was rushed, maybe you were pushed into it, but at the same time you found kind of your passion, right? And you found something that up to this date you enjoy doing a lot. And I think when you are leading teams, that's a priority. You have to enjoy it, right? It's so hard. It takes so much energy from you that if you don't enjoy it and if you don't find joy in it, then it's not really for you, right? So um What do you like the most about leading a team?
That's another good question. I would say that 10 years ago, if you had asked me, I would have said that, hey, leading the technical architecture and so on. But nowadays, I fall back a little bit on developing the people. I think that that's the crucial element. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about people. And if you don't have a good working team with motivated individuals in it, no matter how good your technology is, no matter how good your processes are, it's not going to succeed. So, making sure that people feel safe, comfortable, aware, focused. It's a not dealing with people is not as simple as writing a program, right? I mean, it's a multi-dimensional problem, and that actually is exciting to me, and giving them that technical background and saying that, hey, I have done that, I know what you're feeling and understanding, and I know I can help you here. That definitely excites me a lot more nowadays. So
Soumya, when you are growing or scaling a team, right? And that's a lot of what you do. You're very good at growing teams, scaling them, getting them to a different level. What particular challenges do you face when doing that?
I can think of two primary things that always comes up. One of them is the sequence of events that need to happen, right? Like when, as I said, like we talk about people, processes, and technology, right? And sometimes you're scaling all three of them. Sometimes, or at least one is getting prepared to be scaled. Like so, obviously, maybe let's say you want to add more people to your team. Okay, fine. Hopefully, you have a reason to add more people. So that's probably the technology side of the house. But are your processes ready, or do you have to wait till all your people join in and then you kind of start doing the processes and improving the processes? Or if you do the process optimization too early with less people, it may become too much of an overhead for the people that you have currently and not necessarily going to work until you actually scale. But get sequence of events right is very crucial in my opinion, and that is not. I mean, there is no easy formula for it. You have to kind of go through the processes and go through the motions essentially, and depending on the context, depending on the situation, you have to decide what's right. So that's one problem that I generally face and deal with. The other one is the transition, like the onboarding, I would say, not really transition, but more the onboarding of people. So okay, so let's say you have a bunch of people that are interested to work in your team, and you have them right now. How quickly can you get them effective? If that is going to take a long time, then that's a problem, right? Like, and so that's another challenge. There are ways you can obviously handle both of these things, and again, as I said, the first challenge is a little bit more contextual, so you have to kind of figure out, like, depending on the situation. But the second one, there are practices that you can follow to help ease the onboarding process, right? Like, uh, I know a lot of engineers probably don't like this word, but hey, documentation does help. I mean, I always say that let's not write a thesis, please, but at least the essentials, right? Like, do we have a documentation for what do I do when I turn on my laptop? Like, my first time, do I know what repos to get to, and how do I set up my dev environment? How do I deploy things? There are some things that you can do to make some people get onboarded quicker. So that's at least one of the things that you can do. But yeah, to answer your question, those are some of the biggest challenges that I think kind of come up when you are, at least I face when I am growing or scaling teams.
I like what you say very much because few people talk about how important onboarding is. And I think onboarding is vital for people to stay. You messed up or onboarding, people will leave, right? They might not tell you that that's the reason why, but they probably made their mind right then, right? You hire
Exactly.
someone and you keep them waiting for a week with no access, no documentation to read, no nothing. And all they do is wonder why the hell did they join this place? And where can they go next and when, right? And maybe they take 3 months, 5 months, 6 months to leave, but probably they made up their mind right there because the onboarding failed. And many people don't realize that.
Absolutely. I mean, first impressions always matter. And let's face it, I mean, as you said, right, like somebody's making a decision to join your team. They're probably leaving other opportunities behind, and they're taking a big risk. And the first impression that you want to kind of do is like, hey, it's a safe place. This is welcoming. Yeah, it's not, everything is not perfect, but it's there. We are there. There are things here you can work on, you can help, and so on. So I have faced that myself. Like, I've worked at a place where the first week I didn't even have a laptop. So it's like people are like, hey, you can log in. It's a Google account. You can just log in. But like, I don't want to do that. I mean, you know, but still, it happens, and there are reasons for that too. I do get that, but still, like, that's first impressions, right? Like, and so it's very important to have those people onboarded quickly and have them productive. People are dying to get good stuff out the door, right? So let's not be a roadblock. That's my motto. So
I agree. How do you build an engineering culture, and how do you sustain it over time, right? Because as an expert in scaling teams, you probably, maybe you created a culture, but then you are bringing so many new people to the team, right? And sometimes that growth can be very fast, right? So
yes.
how do you manage that? How do you sustain a culture with the team with so many changes happening?
A couple of things I would say. One thing that I am very strongly, I do strongly believe in uh, um, is to make sure that the people that I depend on, as the if I have other team members that I rely on as the next level of leaders, I want to make sure that they are in sync with me in terms of this culture. If we are growing a team from 10 people to 100, there will probably, once you have the 100, it is going to be quite difficult to individually manage each of those 100 people, right? So you have to depend on some people and hope that they share the same passion for that engineering culture that you do. Now, to go back to your first question, how do you even get started? How do you bootstrap it? So I typically lean on my personal values, and I tend to join organizations where there is a big overlap between my values and the organization's values. Uh, like, for example, like, I am a big proponent of ownership and accountability, and respect, and a bias for action. So I feel that, if and generally, obviously, all the companies that I've worked for, they also share that same level of, same values. So what happens is that, like, when I am kind of building that culture, I depend on my values, and then I try to kind of work with my team, which is, at that time, it is a smaller team, kind of say, hey, this is what I believe in. Let's hear what you guys believe in. Sometimes they have their own additional things, which are all good. Like, everybody brings in good values. Everybody has values. They may or may not realize it, but they do have that, right? And so they bring that to the table, and we kind of build that culture, build the practices around that culture, and make sure that, hey, are these practices scalable also, right? And then kind of develop the process and the that kind of make sure that people are operating within that value framework. So then, once you have that, once you're sure that that is working, that is what people are comfortable in, then you can, that's the point where I can rely on my next generation of leaders, that, okay, when it's their turn to kind of work with their teams, I know that these are the values that they're going to instill within their teams. And then it keeps going ad nauseum. So that's what I've dealt with mostly, and it seems to work. So yeah.
And how do you choose the right people? You're talking a lot about values. That's very important. but choosing the right people and making sure that they share the values, it's more difficult than it sounds, right?
Of course.
What are your best practices there when you are doing interviews, when you are, onboarding people? What are the subtle or not subtle things you're looking for when identifying the right values?
Yeah, so it is difficult. I mean, and as when I'm going through an interview process, it's generally 45 minutes to an hour, maybe two calls, but it's hard to assess somebody within that period of time. And also it could be that the person is not at their best at that point of time. Lots of things can happen. But what I generally try to do is I have a kind of a set of questions that I tend to ask, and these are generally open-ended, right? I mean, some of them are obviously more directed towards a specific skill set that I'm looking for, but for the behavioral part of it, that's where I kind of provide open-ended questions, and I look for certain keywords, right? Like I like to hear the word I. That's the one time I like to hear the word I rather than we, because again, I'm looking for your contribution to the team, right? Not your entire team's contribution. And then I know it's not always doesn't come naturally also to certain people. um, so I try to kind of like put them on the spot and say, okay, now I want to hear about your specific contribution. And then I give them some scenarios, right? Like, what would you do if you had to like pick up, let's say, for example, generative AI? If you do not have that background, how would you go about doing that? And generally from the answers, like, if you are looking for those who are generally ownership or accountability minded, they would answer the question in a certain way, and those who are not, they will try to answer, or they will answer it in a slightly different way. And you catch on those subtleties, right? And that's what you kind of like look for and say, oh, wait a second, that's not what I hear. Is that a bulletproof way? Probably not. I don't know, but I mean, I think it kind of lean on my experience a little bit too, and say like, hey, at least 60% of the time it worked, so hopefully it'll work. But I think that's the best you can do in 45 minutes, or an hour maybe. And people are, it's not easy to fake also, right? So people do what they do, right? And it is, you figure it out quickly. So but yeah, I mean, I think, but to answer your question more directly, right? I mean, I think one of the important things is to make sure that I do have that understanding of the person. Somebody might be very, very technically skilled, but if they don't have the right cultural fit, that's not the person I would like to work with. And I don't want to, because it's not just a burden on me, right? I mean, it's a burden on the team. And that can, a bad hire, as everybody knows here, right? I mean, a bad hire can really mess things up significantly for your team. So it's, if it is not a good fit, it's not a good fit. So I want to make sure that, as let's say, sometimes if there are interviews, I want to make sure that there is a technical component to it, which I let uh, the more technically competent people kind of run. I come in with a certain level of like expertise that I expect for, but I spend a lot more time on the behavioral aspects so that I can spend the time and understand how they operate and if that's going to be the good fit. So.
Did you ever run the numbers on approximately how many interviews you conducted in your career? Have you ever thought about that?
Actually, at one job I did. I was, but then I was there for about 3 years, or a little less than 3 years. And I mean, towards the end, I was like, okay, what's the point? I mean, I know it's a lot, so I'm not even going to bother. So, and then since then, I've kind of stopped it. It can be very interesting, So when you look back.
Right. And then you think about it and you realize that you did hundreds and hundreds and even thousands. And I think, you know, there can be bias. You can call your gut feeling different ways, right? You can call it a bias or you can call it an educated guess, right? Because you saw so many things that you start identifying the trends. And so that's where I'm coming from, right? I think that when you get to have certain experience, your gut feeling is not just a gut feeling. It's like a well-trained, statistical algorithm.
Exactly. It's fine-tuned.
It is fine-tuned. Soumya, what do you think are the keys to lead a distributed team?
Yeah, so that is a good question because I have been working remotely for more than 10 years now, even way before COVID forced us mostly to kind of work remotely. So I believe that I think engagement is probably the most complicated thing to uh, maintain, I guess, in a distributed team. So my focus is on that primarily. So how do I keep the team engaged, right? Like, I mean, everybody is going to be comfortable working in their own little corners, and I know that there are ways you can figure out, like, if people are doing their work, there are processes in place, but that's not enough, right? Like, I mean, I want to make sure that nobody feels isolated, that, hey, I didn't even know that this was the big picture of the company. That's my biggest nightmare, honestly. Like, if people are doing something and they're not aware why they're doing anything, to me, that is like, I would consider it a personal failure, that I was not able to articulate that to that person. So I spend a lot of time making sure that um, the engagement exists. And what now, again, the challenge, the counterpoint to that is, hey, let's call a meeting every day, right? Like, well, that I don't want to do that either, because I don't want to kind of destroy the developer time. That's the most precious thing that they are offering. So I think it's a good balance of that. There are ways to do asynchronous messaging about things. In a previous job, one of my bosses, I learned something from him, that he used to write a blog about what's going on in the company, what's the latest. It's just like, basic stuff. But then sometimes it would be more like strategic elements thrown in there, like, hey, we are planning to do X in the coming 3 to 6 months, because that's where the industry is going. So there are ways to do that too, and then that way, you can kind of do that. One-on-ones are a must for sure. It's a low touch thing, and you don't have to do that every time. You do it in a way that is compatible with the developers or whoever your team members are. um, you can, and then occasionally we should get together on a call, and it's not necessarily about technology or anything that you're working on. It could be more like, hey, let's just talk about the fun stuff that you did, especially after a big vacation, or in the summer. At least in the US, summers are a lot of a time when people connect with their families, go out for things, like, let's talk about that, right? And it'll never be the same as in person, right? But you can try to make it as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, I think that, like, making sure that people are engaged, that I didn't forget the newest member of the team, and on the other side, like, the quietest member of the team, and I make sure that they are engaged. I think that to me is the biggest thing, and the key to maintaining a distributed team.
And when do you think the team becomes successful, right? What makes a team successful?
I always consider three things. I talked about ownership and accountability. I also think that knowing what they're working on, which is, I guess, maybe in a way, it's the engagement aspect that I was talking about. And then from there, deriving from there, the focus. Uh, a focused team that knows what it is doing and why it is doing it, and why it is important to work on that and not something else, is important. And then making sure that there is ownership and there is accountability. I think those four are the important ones. And if I can make sure that all my team members are aware that that's what I'm looking for, then they have all the freedom in the world to I can be rest assured that I don't have to kind of like spend too much time involved with them all the time. I don't have to do that. I know that they are smart enough, they are capable enough to manage their own work, and that will make it more successful. And again, I think that brings the motivation. To be successful, you need to be motivated. At least I'm sure it's one of the requirements for any kind of success, personal or team level. And motivation comes from engagement, and motivation comes from knowing the goals, knowing the focus, and agreeing that that's what we should be doing, and feeling that yes, that is what should be doing. And so if we can line all those up and string them up, I think then that will lead to success.
Nice. Very nice. Soumya, this one, I might be leading the witness here a little bit, but what new technology excites you today?
Today, interesting. Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm not going to lie. I mean, generative AI is very intriguing for sure. And in the last year or so, we've spent a lot of time focusing on various aspects of it. Um, is it going to destroy the world? I hope not. I don't think so. But at the same time, like there's definitely a lot of potential for this, both good and bad. Um, but yeah, I think that's one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Other than that, I am also interested, and this might be really out there, but quantum computing kind of interests me, and I'm kind of slowly getting more uh, familiarized with it. As I said, like my background was in physics, so that's part of the motivation of like, hey, quantum and computing, that's kind of interesting. So let's see what's going on there. And I don't know if that is at a point. I don't know enough about it to really make an educated guess or judgment on it, but that's definitely something that I'm keeping another eye on. So but yeah, I think those are two, probably enough to keep me busy for the next few years. So
Those are two that will change the world. I did a podcast once with a woman that is working on, she has a quantum computing based security software and solution, right? It's
mm-hmm.
mostly used for creating security passwords and passcodes for doors, etc., etc., etc. But it's like high level, defense stuff that the use cases are very interesting. And so I had to learn about computing, quantum computing, and qubits, and entanglement, and all of the different concepts there. And I can only imagine as a physicist how that breaks all of your paradigms, right? And a thing can be in two places and two states at once. A thing that is somewhere can be related to a thing that is in a completely different place, and their state can be, and it's like I get dizzy already by just saying that, right? But then the computing power that it has, and where can it take everything, and even AI, right? I mean, take the most powerful AI system and do it with a functioning quantum computer, and things get crazy, right? We are creating God. I don't know. I get too philosophical about it, but I think it's an interesting place where we're going to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing that we have to be a little bit more cautious about. It is getting to a point where people, as human beings, we need to be a little careful about all the technologies that we are pushing out there. Again, I think it's not so much all the doomsday scenarios are not. I mean, the traditional doomsday science fiction scenarios that are being brought up, I don't know how much I ascribe to those type of thought processes, but I'm more concerned about the abuse of it, like in terms of the social media aspect, right? Like, I mean, anybody can make any kind of videos and deep fakes, and and it's getting easier and easier, right? I mean, and that's what's scary, because that is really can push us to a doomsday scenario much quicker and in a much more unexpected way than what we think, right? I mean, you can start wars and you can start some sort of like crazy mass mania, with those type of things. So yeah, we got to be responsible and understand it, so that at least when we are using it, we spend some time and say, wait, all right, should I really be doing this or not? So that's going to be an interesting challenge that I'll be interested to see how our next generation kind of adapts to that. So
Indeed, indeed. Um, when you think about the future of your profession as an engineering leader, how do you think your profession will change in the next years?
so yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion about like certain jobs absolutely going away. I think that that might happen to a certain degree. And from what I've seen about like software development, or how like say things like Copilot and generative AI is helping develop code, um, I don't think like the jobs will go away that easily, right? I mean, I think that it is just more of an augmentation. I think it's a good thing, because what that will do is that it'll take away some of the more mundane aspects of software development, and hopefully force people to think more creatively, right? And more, uh, what should I say, in a deeper way, like think about like what should be the right solution, what should be the right way to approach a given problem, rather than working out the mechanics and spending time on the mechanics of the particular solution that they're thinking about. So I think that people have to get a lot more um, aware of all the possibilities of different algorithms and different data structures. And I'm talking about more new entrants to the field, right? Like those who are coming out with a computer science degree, or some sort of um, expertise in programming. It's not just going to be enough. There's going to be a lot more that will be expected from people. So I think that needs to, like, I don't know how will that be through our education system? Would that be through more certifications, or whatever the mechanism is, that people need to be aware that that's what I'm telling my son, right? He's interested in programming, and I'm telling him like, hey, just don't. This is just a tool, and you got to have a much higher level thought process than just writing a program and getting something going. That's needed, but you need to think more beyond that. So that's definitely one thing. The one thing that I don't like about where things are going is that with the ease of things like Copilot, probably, um, yes, I mean, a lot of code is probably generated, but then it also opens up a tendency to not think through things, right? Like, oh, ChatGPT or whatever, generative AI generated this for me, it must be right. I'm going to use it as is, and not think twice about it. That's should not be the case either, right? Like, so you need to think higher level, but don't lose the lower level focus also. I think that that's an interesting challenge. Like, those of us who have gone through like building stuff in assembly language and stuff like that, I don't have to, or anybody hopefully doesn't have to write assembly language code when they're writing a web application. But knowing that behind the scenes at the back of your mind does help me in certain ways still. I feel that a lot of this automation that is going on, a lot of the speed at which things like generative AI are pushing um, the progress in our field, might be diluting that aspect of it, right? And like, all right, you don't have to worry about it. It's all correct. What I'm going to generate is all correct, which I don't know, not sure yet. Maybe it will be much better 10 years from now, but that's not where it is currently. So I think that is going to be an interesting challenge. Having a more of a product mindset is probably, like, engineers should not just focus on getting a solution, right? Like, think about, as we were just now discussing, right? Like, what implications it might have as a product, what implications it might have, the safety from regulations, or from like, hey, what impact it might have on the society. I think those are important considerations too. What they can, what they should be doing, what business will allow them to do, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you don't have a choice, but at least being aware and being mindful of it and trying to incorporate some safeguards right from the beginning is probably something that will not just come from top level leaders, but also engineers in our profession. I think that that's what people should be trained in, and people will probably have to spend more time on it. So that's what I think. I mean, eventually that's where our profession is going to be. So do a lot of the things that we are doing, but at a higher level right now, and push it down much early on, and have the expectation that much more people just joining the profession probably have that type of thought process in mind when they're joining the profession. So,
We live in interesting times, that's for sure.
absolutely.
Soumya, one last question to you. What do you do when you are not working?
Oh man. So I have two small kids, so I kind of live vicariously through their activities a little bit, as you probably might know. Probably not a big surprise there. But at the same time, I do enjoy, working with kids and making sure that they're getting out of the house and away from the tablets and the computers and the phones, and doing something with their hands and feet, because God has given them those things for a reason. So I enjoy that a lot. I am also involved in some community things here and there. So that kind of excites me sometimes. Uh, what I really love to do is I love to catch up on my reading, which I think I've lost count how many years I've really fallen behind. But um, you know, and then the last one is like, I love painting, and that's the one thing that I really wish I could have enough time to do, but it's not enough. I guess I'm not doing a good job at managing my time, I guess. But still, like, those are generally things that I tend to fall back on when I'm not working. Gives me some peace.
That's a very interesting one. And if I may offer a suggestion, you could pick it up and make it, a Friday type post on social media like LinkedIn. Like, this is what I'm painting right now, right? Enjoy the weekend, right? A reminder for everyone to have like something to do when they are not working. And then it shows something very creative about you. And it brings, a point in that engineers are very creative, and people do not tend to think about engineers as creative people, but you are, because you need to think about creatively about how to solve problems all the time. And the more I know engineers, the more I realize that many of them are, they like painting, they like music, they like whatever, and that's very creative in nature, because you are rational, but at the same time you have that side of creative, diversion thinking to just solve problems. So I love that. I love the whole thing about painting.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Matteo. I will take that up. I think it's a simple thing, but yeah, it has a lot of power. And I think people should be doing it. I think a lot of as you were saying, like, in our profession, a lot of people are, you need to kind of detach yourself from one type of problem, do something creative in a different area, so that you can recharge. That recharging is very important too. So
Yeah. Soumya, this has been an amazing conversation, my friend. I always love talking to you, but doing this in an in-depth manner and learning more about the amazing experience that you have, it's a beautiful thing to do. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time to be a guest at my show, and I hope that we get to do this sometime again in the future.
hey, thank you, Matteo, for inviting me. I really had a good time. All very thoughtful questions. I can see why a lot of people love your podcast, and it's fun. And I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.